What is going on, my broskiis? My name is Toadski and I'm back again, here to bring you guys yet another One Piece Treasure Cruise video. And today, guys, I'm going to be talking about a brand new game mechanic that is coming into One Piece Treasure Cruise Global very soon with the new 4.0 update that has been confirmed to be happening very soon. Now, we don't know an exact date as of me making this video right now, but there will be a brand new game mechanic that will be introduced into the game upon this release of the new version of the game. Now, that is the sockets. Now, in the Japanese version of One Piece Treasure Cruise, they've had sockets for quite a while now, and they're such a game-changing mechanic that it literally enables you to complete dungeons much faster, much quicker, and just to do it in different ways with many different teams. They just allow you to do so many more things with the game, and they're definitely something that you want to be looking to, you know, try and max out when they get introduced into the global version of this game. So without further ado, guys, let's get straight into the video of all of these sockets and the breakdown of what they do. So first of all, guys, let's go ahead and break down how do these sockets actually work. So the way sockets work is that when you feed another unit the same copy of itself. Now, this can work in many different ways. So for an example here, if you feed a Gear 3 Luffy to a Gear 2 Luffy, you will get a socket spot. Now, you wouldn't really want to feed a Gear 3 Luffy to a Gear 2 Luffy, but this can work in so many different ways. So, hypothetically, if you have the Kid Luffy from when he was with Kid Ace and Kid Sabo, and you feed that to a Gear 3, that also counts as giving one socket spot. So, there are many different types of units and different copies of themselves within the game. So, there's lots of different ways in order to get socket spots on your units. Now, you can also feed another thing that will be introduced called Skull Books, or Socket Books as they're called. Now, they're very similar to Skill Books. However, instead of giving you, a chance to get a special up, they give you a guaranteed one socket spot. Now, this is a random socket spot, and there are actually 10 different socket spots. Now, you might be thinking, why would you go all through this effort to try and get all of these socket things? Now, sockets, what they actually do, they have many different abilities that will help you clear dungeons so much easier and so much faster. Now, the 10 different socket abilities are as follows. So starting from left to right, we have the increased damage reduction, then we have cooldown reduction, then we have lock resistance, and then we have anti-captain silence, then recovery per turn, increased recovery, matching orb slots, poison resistance, environmental shield, and survivalist. Now we'll go ahead and break down each of these 10 socket spots in greater depth. So the first socket spot that we have here is the damage reduction socket. Now, this socket will actually reduce the amount of damage that you take from an enemy attack. Now, for each unit that you have that you're feeding sockets to or trying to farm sockets for, when they get a socket, they can only have a maximum of 5 socket spots on each of their spots. So, for example, one unit can only have 5 different types of the same socket. Now, each single unit will only have a certain amount of placings for sockets. So some units will have 2 socket spots, so they can have 2 different types of sockets. Some will only have 3, some will have 5, some will have 1, some will have none completely. So, if your team has a total of 5 sockets for damage reduction, you will receive a 3% damage reduction from oncoming attacks, which is pretty nice. Now, at level 2, if you have 10 socket spots on your team for damage reduction, you'll receive a 5% damage reduction. And then if your team has 15 socket spots, you'll receive 10% damage reduction from oncoming attacks. Now, overall, in my opinion, this socket is okay. It's not bad. It depends on what type of units and what type of team you are running. But overall, this isn't one of the most sought after sockets. But now let's move on to the Cooldown Socket, which is definitely one of the most powerful ones in the game. So here we have the reduce of cooldowns. Now this socket will reduce the turns of your units need to charge for their specials. So if you have 10 socket spots of the reduced cooldown sockets on your team, you'll receive a 1 turn reduction on all of your specials upon entering any dungeon. Now this is a very powerful effect. However, if you reach 20 sockets on your team in total, you'll receive a 2 turn reduction in needing to charge your specials. This is so powerful. So if you could imagine, if you have 20 sockets of reducing cooldowns, and if you have a max Mihawk, it means you'll only have to wait 15 turns in order to get Mihawk special in order to activate to reduce the opponent's HP by 30%. That is so powerful, such a great socket, very powerful socket, one of the best ones to farm for in this game. Just being able to get all your units to a reasonably low cooldown as soon as you enter a dungeon is just perfect. So now let's move on now to the anti-lock or the anti-binding socket. So here we have the reduce unit binding socket. Now this will actually reduce the amount of turns that your units will be locked or chained or binded for, however you want to say it. Now at level 1, if you have 10 sockets on your entire team, binding is reduced by 1 turn. If you have 15, then it's by 2 turns, and then 20 on your whole team is reduced by 3 turns. So this is by far one of the most powerful sockets in the game. It allows you to beat so many raid bosses. Like in the future, we're probably going to get Aokiji very soon. And by having this socket maxed or close to max, it just makes it so much easier to beat. And, you know, just by far, it's going to make raid bosses and Fortnite dungeons and even story mode, in a way, a lot more easier to farm for. And it's definitely one of the best socket spots to get a hold of in this game. So now we're going to have a look at the Captain Silence Reduction. So as the title suggests, this will reduce the amount of turns that your captains or your friend captains will be reduced by silencing. Now this is a very powerful socket as well, where at level 1, if you have 10 sockets, you reduce by 1, 15 by 2, and 20 by 3. So it's the exact same as the chain socket. However, instead of, you know, reducing chain turns, it's reducing the Captain Silence Reduction. So with this one, this is very good as well. This is great for taking on Blackbeard, because if you guys haven't taken on Blackbeard, once he gets below 50%, he starts locking your captain, and then under 20%, he starts locking you and your friend captain. So by having this, it basically makes that nullified, and you can take down Blackbeard so easily with this socket activated. So this goes hand in hand with the anti-lock or the anti-chain socket. These both together are very powerful sockets, so definitely this, the cooldown, and the chain socket so far are very great sockets to try and farm for. Now the 5th socket spot we're going to talk about is the recovery per turn. So this is actually a really nice socket spot to get as well. Now, I wouldn't recommend making this one of your main socket spots to try and farm for. Definitely the anti-lock and anti-silence are definitely one of the 2 best ones. However, if your character that you're trying to farm sockets for has, you know, 4 or 5 socket spots, this could be one that you could fit in there, where if you have level 1, so 5 socket spots on your team, so if just one of your members has max sockets for recovery per turn, you're going to get 100 health recovered after attacking every turn. So moving on from that, if you have 8 sockets on your team, you'll get 200, 12 sockets will get you 300, 16 sockets will get you 500, and if you have 24 sockets on your team dedicated to recovery per turn, you will recover 1000 health every turn after attacking. So you're probably never going to ever get the level 5 socket spot for recovery per turn. However, you know, just getting a little bit of recovery every turn is always nice. It's always good for those captains that need to be at full health, or that have a better multiplier depending on how much health they have. So having recovery per turn is always nice. It can actually save you in a couple of instances. Definitely a very nice socket spot to try and farm for on your team. Now, very similar to that, we have the increased recovery socket. So this pretty much works in the same way as the recovery per turn. However, this one only activates by giving you more recovery each time you access a meat orb when you're inside a dungeon. So it's the exact same amount of sockets per team and the exact same amount of health increased by the exact same amount of socket levels. So it goes by 5 to get 100, 8 to get 200, 12 to get 300, 16 sockets to get 500, and if you have max at 24, you get 1000 extra recovery each time you pick up a meat orb. So, you know, it's better to have the recovery per turn. However, in some teams, you know, this could be good, but, you know, this one isn't really seen in much play currently. It's just not really that good. You definitely want to try and get your locks and your silences, like, compared to this type of socket. You know, it's just not as good as, you know, getting, you know, recovery per turn. Recovery per turn is way easier, as you don't have to try and farm a meat orb in order to get more recovery, where you can just access more recovery every turn automatically. So this is definitely one of the least sought after socket spots, but, you know, I still have to explain to you guys, it is there if you guys are after this type of socket spot on your team. So now we move on to the matching orb socket spot, which, as the title suggests, you're going to be getting matching orbs. Depending on what level you are, you can get a small, medium, or high chance of getting matching orbs for your units. So this basically means that if you have, you know, a multicolored team, if you have this socket spot, each of your units has a higher chance of getting an orb that is the same color as the unit that they are. So if you have like a full team of red orbs, you'll get a higher chance, or depending on what type of socket level you're up, to basically get the same colored orbs on your team. Now this enables teams to output so much more damage, and it just helps you just so much in dungeons. You know, the matching orbs socket spot is actually so powerful. Now you can use, you know, this socket spot in conjunction with a special like Thatch or like Little Orbs Jr. that will increase the chance of red orbs appearing, or the chance of blue orbs appearing. So if you have like a blue team and you use Thatch's special, you're gonna get a high chance of getting blue orbs on your team. So this socket spot is by far one of the best socket spots to try and get. So by having 5 socket spots on your team dedicated to the matching orb socket, you'll get a small increase. If you have 10 sockets, it's a medium increase, and then if you have 20 sockets, it is a large increase, and that large increase is actually pretty large. You're going to be getting a lot of matching orbs on your team. So as I said, guys, this is by far one of the best sockets to get on your team. Moving on now, guys, we have the poison resistant socket. Now this one will reduce the effects of poison that happen to your team. So at level 1 with 5 sockets on your team, you'll get poison effects reduced by 20%. So basically means that if you have poison inflicted on your team, and you're going to be taking 100 damage every turn, that gets reduced by 20%, so you only take 80 damage. Now, at level 2 with 10 sockets on your team, you'll get it all reduced by 50%, and then at level 3 with 20 sockets dedicated to poison resistance, it negates the poison altogether, which is quite nice. However, poison isn't really as relevant as, you know, some other like types of sockets in One Piece Treasure Cruise. So, you know, there's only a couple of dungeons that actually utilize poison that actually can get quite annoying. So having the poison socket is kind of a waste, because it's only really relevant in some very specific circumstances. So that's why this socket isn't really as popular. However, if poison was a constant thing that would happen in One Piece Treasure Cruise, I'm sure that this would get a lot more play. However, as I said, you know, you don't see too many dungeons implementing poison, so this socket is almost a waste and not really worth trying to max out. Moving on to the second last socket spot, we have the Environmental Shield. Now, this will reduce the effects of environmental damage within all dungeons. So, namingly, there are 2 that come to mind straight away. One is being the Enel Raid Boss. If you guys don't know, there is the lightning that hits you every 3 turns. Now, if you have this socket spot, you can reduce the damage or reduce the effects of the lightning damage of that dungeon by a lot. So you could use it for that. However, you know, as I said, it's almost the same as the poison resistance, where environmental damage isn't really seen that much in One Piece Treasure Cruise, so it's not really worth trying to farm the sockets for it. Another one could be, you know, in Alubana in the story mode, where there's the sandstorm and stuff like that, but, you know, there isn't really too many instances where this is actually useful. But at level 1 with 10 sockets, you get all damage reduced by 50% of environmental damage, and then at level 2 with 20 sockets on your team, you'll have it basically negated altogether. So, you know, it is kind of good, but, you know, it is a little bit, you know, hefty cost having 20 socket spots dedicated to it on your team. That means that 4 of your units has to have this maxed out on your team. So I don't really think that this is a great socket spot. However, if environmental damage becomes more relevant, it will be seen a little bit more often. But, you know, it's the same as the poison resistance, where it's not seen as much in the game, so it's not really needed to try and max this socket spot out on your units. The last socket spot that we're going to be discussing is the Survivalist Socket spot, where this basically means that by having 5 socket spots on your team, you have a small chance of surviving a fatal blow on 1 health. Now, with level 2 at 10 socket spots, you'll have a medium chance of surviving on 1 health after a fatal blow, and at level 3, you'll have 20 socket spots on your team dedicated to the Survivalist Socket, where it will give you a large chance of surviving a fatal blow on 1 HP. Now, this is definitely not one you want to try and max out. I mean, you would much rather try and get matching orbs, or reduce cooldowns, or your chains and your captain silence, then rather, you know, try and survive a hit on 1 HP. It's not something that you really want to try and use, but it is still there if you guys want to try and do that, but definitely there are better socket spots to try and farm for on your units. So that brings us to the end of this video, guys. I hope you guys did enjoy today's video, and if you guys did, make sure to smack that like button down below, and if you want to stay up to date with all of the content that I post on my channel, including more One Piece Treasure Cruise content, then make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. But other than that, guys, I will see you guys within the next video.